We'll be in Genesis 37 this morning. Genesis 37. We are moving into one of the most famous sections of Genesis, and I want to be very upfront about that you've all heard this story numerous times. Some of you have gone through Bible studies just on this character that we're going to spend the rest of the book with, really. So don't hesitate to speak up, ask a question, make a comment. I'm not the only one who's read this stuff, all right? This is one of the opportunities we have in a smaller setting like this where you have more of an opportunity to bring stuff in. I've been very happy with questions that get raised or statements that get said, verses that get read. So don't hesitate at all. But as knowing that we're moving into such a famous story, I will preface it with a few comments here. So in Genesis 37, one of the things we're going to see here is this theme of favoritism, right? All right. So favoritism, the favoritism that Israel or Jacob displayed for Joseph is not equal to the foul treatment that Dinah suffered from Shechem. All right, so what I'm trying to do here is we're going to see that Joseph is favored above all of his brothers. We know that, right? And to say that, oh, that's just like a woman being sexually assaulted, those are not the same. They are not equal. But they are similar in that the favoritism shown to Joseph means that there are others who are lower on the totem pole, if you will. And those who are lower on the totem pole are going to look at Joseph and their father and say, Dad likes him more than they like us. That is not fair. That's not right. That's an injustice. And similar to what happened to Dinah, is definitely an injustice. Someone tread upon her being, they tread upon her body, and her mistreatment. And the reason I bring this up is because the situation with Dinah and the situation with Joseph all happen within the same family. And the way that Jacob's sons respond in Dinah's situation, we're going to see a precedent has been set with how they're going to respond with Joseph, all right? So we're going to see that both experiences provoke reactions from Israel's sons, and in both cases, the sons respond poorly. They choose deception and violence rather than the better way. What's the better way? Well, there was arguably a better way to respond to what happened with Dinah. And one of the faults there is that Jacob was perhaps too soft with what happened with Dinah. And when justice is not dealt with properly, there will usually be those who step in and try to handle it, and sometimes they will handle it in an improper fashion. And we're going to see here Joseph's brothers choose the improper way to respond here. But what I also want us to think about is, too, when we talk about the divine will of God, because the Bible is a study of God, right? We do learn of Joseph, and we learn of Jacob, and we learn of Sarah, and we see ourselves and learn about ourselves, but ultimately it's about God. And when we study the Bible, there is that theme of favoritism. God chose the Jews. He did take care of the Greeks also, but he still chose of the Jews. God still chose mankind over the angels. And what I will say here is God's favoritism does not remove his love and provision for those who maybe aren't high up on the totem pole, if you will. And we see this. Does God, here's a question to think about, does God highly favoring Jesus Christ above all others make the angels and us nothing? Well, the answer is no. But it is a fallen nature, it is a sin nature that says, if I'm not here, I'll not be satisfied to be here, right? It's either all or nothing. And God is much more complex than that with how he treats his creation. It is a paradox. It is a paradox that Jesus Christ, who is the most highly favored of all beings in the universe, is the one who would give himself for some of the lowest in creation. And this would be said to be the love of God. So there's this great complexity here. So with that in consideration, Justin Jackson is a professor at Hillsdale College, and he has a really good lecture series on the book of Genesis. And when he gets to the story of Joseph, he offers this thought that the narrative of Joseph is what's known as a penitential narrative. And the word penitential comes from the idea of penance. And penance is, I am sorry, please forgive me. And Justin Jackson makes the argument or posits the question that as we study the story of Joseph, and we can certainly study the story of Joseph and look at it as an example of someone who has been blessed by God and ascends to the highest power, even though he's been mistreated. And that's certainly something that can be studied in the life of Joseph. But I like Justin Jackson's also consideration is, let's also not forget the characters who do the things they ought not to do, and what sort of penance do they pay? Are they ever redeemed? Do they ever apologize? Is there reconciliation? And so we will look at that. And to that note, Professor Jackson also says it's worth thinking about Judah in a different light in the story. That possibly Judah is the hero of the Joseph story. Now, I don't know that I agree with that. I don't know that that's true. But as you follow Judah throughout the story, we're going to see that Judah is the one that makes a huge change towards the end that we're all familiar with. So let's get into the text. So Genesis 37, we have gone through Genesis 36, all of the generations of Esau. He receives his reward of the earth. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger. And as we said last week, as we study the generations of Jacob here, we're going to see that they dwelt as strangers on the earth, as we all do, as we are the engrafted ones in the family of Israel. We are going to see the failures of Jacob's generation. And above all else, we will see God's faithfulness, redemption throughout the story of Joseph. All right, we're going to look at Joseph. And of course, we'll pay a lot of attention to Joseph and to Judah. But I love here what the writer does. These are the generations of Jacob. Verse 2. Boom, he goes right into Joseph. All right. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. No one likes to have their bad news called out on, and they certainly don't like it when it's the favorite kid ratting them out, right? Okay? And Joseph is doing the job he's supposed to do, even as a 17-year-old. The Bible uses the word lad to separate him from his brothers. In the line of Jacob, Reuben is the oldest. Joseph is 17. He is the next to the last in line, and yet he is out with the sheep and has a level of authority. And he comes back and reports, and we hear from the writer here, who most people believe is, if it's Moses who's writing this, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And I love how the story goes next. So we know that Israel loves Joseph more than everyone else. And we know, too, that not only is Joseph a son of Jacob's old age, Joseph's mother is Jacob's first love, his love of Rachel. And we know that the brothers don't like him. And then in the story, watch what happens next. To make matters worse, Joseph dreamed a dream, and who does he tell? People who hate him. We know the brothers hate him. They can't even talk to him. And Joseph has this dream, and then he says, hey, guys, I want to tell you something. And as many scholars have noted, this is probably an example of Joseph's immaturity. He no doubt knows his brothers don't like him. He has this dream. Why go into that hornet's nest and stir that up? Hey, you guys don't like me now? Well, guess what? It'll be okay, because in a couple of years, you'll be bowing the knee to me. That's not how to win friends and influence people. And yet Joseph does. So he told his brethren his dream, and they hated him yet the more. So what we're going to see at the very beginning is Joseph stands well with his father, but not with his brothers. And as pastors pointed out, Joseph is a great example of a type of Christ in that Christ is always in good standing with the Father, and yet Christ would come unto his own, and his own would receive him not. And even Christ's own brothers and sisters on earth would have a very hard time with him. It would not be till after, much later in their life, that they would come to say, okay, we'll follow this guy as the Messiah. So Joseph, though he was the youngest, he has an authority. He reports his brother's poor work, and Joseph will recount the dream that shows his brothers bowing to him. And then in the second dream, let's go here to verse 9. He dreamed yet another dream, and he told it to his brethren, and he said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And now his father rebukes him, and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee in the earth? And his brethren envied him. And we know what envy does, right? Envy only destroys. But his father observed the saying. So to Jacob's credit, Jacob, even though he rebukes his son, said, do you really think the father is going to bow the knee to the son? And yet Jacob still backs off and understands, if he has had this dream, I'm going to contemplate this, think about this, and essentially just hold my peace and see what happens. And then we move into Joseph's brothers decide to do him great harm. And we know the story. The sons are out with the flocks, and Joseph is told, go check on your brothers and report back to me. And let's jump to verse 20. So Joseph eventually tracks his brothers down, and watch what the brothers say here. As Joseph is approaching them, verse 20, they say, come now therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Envy is an extremely powerful, destructive force. And while on a human level, when we tend to show favorites, where we fail is our favorites, we tend to ignore the merits of others and embellish the merits or imagine the merits of the one we favor. There's a simple example from this, from the Anne of Green Gables story, right? We've seen the film, most of us, right? In that little schoolhouse, the teacher has a favorite. Is it Anne? It is not, although she's probably the smartest person in the room. The teacher's favoritism, what it causes him to do is he devotes excessive amount of attention to the young woman and gives her more credit than she deserves, and ignores and actually belittles Anne and all of her works. And the one recourse that Anne has to fall back on is, well, time will tell, right? It'll all come out in the wash. My grades will prove. And to that teacher's credit, he did not cross that line that some people will do and then start to mess with the grades to get the result he wants. But that's a simple example of, here's a human favoritism being shown, and it usually ignores the merits of those who aren't the favored and embellishes or imagines some merits that are there in the favored person. And yet, who in here doesn't have our favorites? We've all been in church long enough now, especially since we've gone into the two-service sequence. When we go into our break time, we all know who hangs out with who, right? Yeah. Now, it's not necessarily an example of West Side Story. Well, come on, let's go. We're going to bust out here and have a fight. But we know who we feel more comfortable with, right? I'm going to sit down and have a snack with this person because we have something in common. We can hang out and we talk and we just get along a little bit better, right? So it's not that favoritism is always this wrong thing, but there is a human way of going about it that is incorrect. And it's certainly how we respond to an injustice or to a sign of favoritism is ultimately what we're in charge of. We cannot control what people do and say. We are in charge of our reactions to that. And even if we can side with Joseph's brothers here and say, man, Dad should not have shown the favoritism like he did, we cannot change what Dad's doing, clearly we ought to be more mindful of how we are responding. And if we have a problem with human favoritism, we still must always come up against the favoritism of God. None of us are Christ. Now, for some of us, that doesn't matter. But as Paul says in the book of Romans, all human beings have had the truth shown to them, and they chose to accept a lie. They were willfully ignorant. We will not go the way that God has established. We will go our own way. We will be our own rulers. We will be, a very modern term, we will be autonomous. We will rule ourselves alone. We will be like a God unto ourselves. And that is something that all of us have to deal with. Because at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we have those thoughts, it's very obvious, well, I might have A, B, C, D as far as talents and looks and privileges and opportunities, but they're not as much as this person. And God has given to whom as he will. And Paul will talk about this in the New Testament. God gives his gifts as he chooses. And that flies very much in the face of the human ideology that says you can be whatever you want to be. No, you can't. And I can't either. But we can be what God has called us to be. And here we have the sons of Jacob. They know that their response is wrong. I can side with them. What kid in here, and that's all of us because we're all kids at one point, who would want to sit back and watch your sibling get the favoritism? That's a hard thing to deal with. And yet their response is completely wrong. And they are contemplating the actual murder of their brother. And it would be good for them to have taken the stance probably like Gamaliel. Okay, here comes Joseph. He's the dreamer. He's got these dreams. Let's see if they come true. Let's make sure we're behaving the way we ought and see what transpires. But the actions that they will take is the plotting of killing him. Verse 21, Reuben hears their plot to kill him, and he delivers Joseph out of their hands and says, let's not kill him. Reuben said this unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him. So Reuben's trying to do an ancient practice of, the Greeks would practice this and the Romans would practice this. If they had a child that they did not want to have, which was usually a woman, a little girl, they would take them and leave the child out in the elements, and they would let the child die by exposure. And they would say, technically, I didn't kill the kid. And that's what Reuben is saying. Let's just throw him in this pit, and if he dies, but we don't have to actually do the killing of him, right? And of course, the writer of the text here tells us the reason Reuben did this is that he might rid Joseph out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. And Reuben has already trespassed upon his father. He slept with his father's concubine. This would probably be a great opportunity to Reuben really to reconcile things with his father. Look, I saved your favorite son, right? So he gives them that plan. Joseph approaches. They take Joseph and they throw him into the pit, and they are contemplating on what to do. And then we see that these travelers, these Ishmaelites, are coming along the way, traveling down to Egypt. Verse 26. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? And Judah's thinking here a little more, he's a little more financially minded, right? Here we can get this guy out of the picture and we can make some money. Let's not actually kill him. We'll sell him as a slave. So they draw Joseph out of the pit. Verse 28, then passed by the Midianite merchantmen. They're going to sell him to the Ishmaelites, who are also the Midianites. They drew Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. And here we have just another example of one of the most ancient practices in human history is that of slavery and human trafficking, right? And yes, we know it's a huge blight on the history of our country, but it is not an act that is exclusive to this country. It has been practiced at all times, throughout all cultures, and it is still going on today. The taking of a human being and treating them as if they were just a body alone. No soul, no spirit, certainly not an image of God. And they will sell him into slavery. And then we get back, verse 29. Reuben returns unto the pit. Joseph is not there, and he tears his clothes. Reuben tears his clothes, and he goes to his brothers and says, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? Reuben is the oldest. He is the firstborn. If something happens to the youngest, whose responsibility is it? It's Reuben's. And I'm sure Reuben already knows, Dad and I don't have the best relationship, and now his best son is gone, and I'm the oldest here. What is going to happen to me? And there's more to come with Reuben later on. Verse 31, they take Joseph's coat, they kill a kid of the goats, and they dip the coat in the blood. And they go to their father, and we see here that the sons lie to their father. And we get down to verse 35, or verse 34. Jacob rent his clothes, he put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I will go down into the grave. This is the Hebrew word Sheol. It's that part in the earth where before Christ would ascend and conquer death and hell, this is where the souls of the dead would go, and they will be brought out. Matthew Henry points this out, and he refers to Luke chapter 16 and Revelation chapter 20. Jacob says, I'm going to die, and I'm going to go down into this pit, and I will mourning my son. It is important to know here that in an effort to do away with the father's favorite, no one is able to fill that void. We will see later on that Benjamin starts to kind of take that place, but all of these sons who are thinking we should be the favorite, we're the oldest, we have all these things, Dad's never really done right by us, and they might be right. They crossed a line they ought not to have crossed, and one of the results they did not get is none of them, not Reuben, not Judah, none of the sons would start to take that place of Joseph.
Yeah, but his sons were selfish.
Very, yeah. Oh, yeah. But Jacob doesn't know, right, that they've lied to him. So if any of the sons, if let's say Reuben's thinking, or not Reuben, let's say Naphtali is thinking, we can kill Joseph, right? And now when Joseph's no longer there, Benjamin's really too young, Dad's going to have to pick a favorite now. And Jacob never does. So it's possible that one of the reactions they're hoping to get, they don't even get that. So now Dad is mournful. He won't even talk to any of us. It drives even further that wedge between son and father, right? Which is ultimately what sin will do. It will not bring those benefits. Verse 36, the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So the chapter ends with us looking at Joseph, and then we will end here today. Then it goes right into chapter 38. And even though this whole story of Jacob, this new generation of Jacob, starts with Joseph, and we ought to pay in mind, he's a great character to study. And not only is he a great character to study, God is the greatest to study. And watch how God works all this out. But under the inspiration of God, the writer here has now switched gears and gone back to look at Judah. And what happens here with Judah is going to reveal something, a ground in Judah's soul that it shows that he is getting prepared for what's going to happen later in the text. So in chapter 38, what happens is Judah goes in and marries a Canaanite woman, more than likely not someone he's supposed to marry. We know the story that his son will marry a woman, and verse 6, Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. Before we read the rest of the verse, I'll stop right here and ask this question. How good an example was Judah of living a life for God? I don't know. I mean, we know what he did with Joseph is not good, but this is a secret that the brothers have kept between themselves, right? But regardless of the example of Judah, his son, as all sons and daughters, must make their own choices. still had to choose, am I going to serve God or am I not? And here the text reveals that chose to be wicked unto the Lord, and in God's providence, verse 7, Jehovah slew him. He's dead. So they bring in another son to marry Tamar. That son is also evil and does not obey, and God kills him. And we have here verse 11, Judah says to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah, my son, be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So we have a woman who's not having any children. She's lost 2 husbands. Now she's being told to wait on another husband who's considerably younger. And we can think of all the situations that could occur there. At any rate, we go to verse 12. In the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. So Judah's wife dies. No, not sure how much time has passed here, but we're going to get here to the end of the chapter and know that it's been enough time to pass that Judah should have given his son to Tamar. But he doesn't. It seems as if Judah is wanting to put the blame for the death of his sons on this woman and not on his sons. And the story goes that Tamar will go, Judah will go up to where they're shearing the sheep. Tamar will dress in the role of a prostitute. She will sleep with Judah. Judah will not know that it's her. And she will, in order to be paid, look at verse 17, I'm sorry. Judah says to her, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And Tamar said, wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? So you're going to send me a kid to pay for my services, but until now, do you have something I can hold on to? And he gives her, verse 18, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, thy signet, thy ring, and thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thine hand. So he gives her all these very personal possessions, right? Not worth a whole lot of money, but worth a great deal of authority and power. And he gave it her, and came in under her, and she conceived by him. It's just another side note here. You can go to Proverbs and study out this idea. The sexual relationships outside of marriage always cost us more than we anticipate. And here's Judah is willing to offer her a kid, which is a big deal in that term, but look at when she says, you need to give me something else. And now he's giving her these heirlooms, these symbols of authority that belong to his family, and he's willing to hand them to a woman that he wants nothing to do with. And there's much more that could be said there. But in time, Tamar will come to be pregnant, and the law of the land was, if the woman's pregnant outside of marriage, she ought to be killed and probably burned. No desire to find who the man was, right? But Judah now rises up in his righteous indignation for an adultery and says, we ought to burn the woman. And verse 25, when she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are, am I with child? And she handed him the signet and the bracelets and the staff. Judah has his sin laid out before him. Okay. Now we have a foreshadow of what's going to happen towards the end of the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers will have their sin laid out before them. We will see Reuben again. Reuben will realize early on, oh, what's happening to us here in Egypt is because of what we did to our brother. When Judah starts to put it together, his response is not just, oh, I see what I'm dealing with. His response will be that of repentance. I'm going to draw an example from the story of Hamlet. In the story of Hamlet by Shakespeare, Hamlet has been told that his father was killed by his uncle. And right when Hamlet has an opportunity to kill his uncle to get revenge, the uncle he finds praying, and in the prayer, the uncle confesses to committing murder. But the uncle never repents. There's a huge difference between confession and repentance. And we have, as human beings, can be very good now at, let's just be authentic and transparent, and let's confess and lay everything out there and get it off our chest. But if there is no repentance, then we have just built another altar unto ourselves. And we're going to see that The change in Reuben is okay, all right, but the change in Judah is going to be much more significant. And look, and here we have a foreshadow of that. Look what Judah does. He has his sin. Boom. It is laid out. It is undeniable. And again, we've talked about this. True justice is an understanding of what is real, what is reality. And a submission to God and his authority is an act, is living according to justice. And yet, as Romans tells us, we can see the truth and turn away from the truth and accept a lie. Judah could have looked at this stuff and think of all the lies he could have come up with. You stole this. That's a copy. You're out to get me. This isn't true. And watch Judah's response. She hath been more righteous than I. Now, not what Tamar did was great, right? But what he did was worse. And he has the humility to say, you're right and I'm wrong. And he will let her be. And Tamar, as most of you already know, if we go to the next few verses at the end of the chapter, verses 27 through 30, she ends up with twins. The first child who pops its hand out has a red thread wrapped around its wrist. That hand will go back into the womb, and another child will come out whose name is Pharez. Pharez is technically the second born, because he is the one who will be in the line of Messiah. Tamar will find herself in the line of Messiah, and it is through the seed of Pharez, the second born. Why God has allowed that, I don't know. But it's this fascinating, mysterious, and yet beautiful story. And we have Judah admitting his fault, and then Tamar, this woman who's really just has been sorely mistreated. She's allowed to be brought into the line of Messiah. And before we get back next week to chapter 39, we go right back into Joseph. I'll just make this last comment and let us go. Even when so much of this story observes Joseph, he is not the only character. We live our lives simultaneously, right? Well, I did all my stuff yesterday. All of you were doing your stuff yesterday, right? We live our lives simultaneously and in concentric circles. To talk and think as if we are the only player or the only notable player on the stage is to live our life as idiots, full of sound and fury. And I draw that out specifically. This is a story of Joseph, but there's a multitude of characters we can learn from and study from, and Judah is one of those, and Tamar as well. And of course, always when we come to the text, what are we discovering about God? And in short, one thing we see about God, we've seen it already in Genesis, and we're going to see it more in Joseph, and we've seen it even now in this situation, is ultimately God is in charge. Will we choose to trust God? Which is the note I put in my Bible at the end of Genesis, so I'm jumping well ahead. Will you trust God? That's a really hard thing to do sometimes. It's hard to maybe do in the abstract, but how do you live that out? Because life is difficult. And we'll come back next week and we'll look at what happens with Joseph. All right? Thank you.